Hello everyone, welcome back for the second part of the video lessons on relative clauses. In this video, we will go over object relative clauses, omitting the relative pronoun, defining versus non-defining relative clauses, and finally, object relative clauses as objects of prepositions. Let's get started. Defining object relative clauses are formed by bringing together two sentences. However, different from subject relative clauses, the relative pronoun is the object of the clause. Similar to defining subject relative clauses, it gives essential information about the noun it modifies. Let's see how they are formed. Humans are generally afraid of things. They don't understand these things. Humans are generally afraid of things that they don't understand. As you can see, instead of using two sentences, we convey our message in one sentence thanks to the object relative clause. Now, let's move on to some details. We use relative pronouns which or that for things. We do this when the object of the clause is not a human being. Let's take a look at the examples. This is the castle that we saw in the documentary. The kettle which I bought yesterday is not working. The math problem that the professor has assigned is really difficult. We use relative pronouns who, whom, and that when the object of the clause is a human being. Let's take a look at the examples. Health workers are people who we should always respect. Do you remember the inventor whom I was talking about yesterday? A pizza delivery boy that I've known for years has now become the manager of the pizza shop. There are some points that you should be careful about forming object relative clauses. The first one is that we should avoid using an object pronoun like it, him, her, or them in the relative clause. Let's see the examples. Health workers are people who we should always respect them. Do you remember the inventor that I was talking about him yesterday? A pizza delivery boy who I've known him for years has now become the manager of the pizza shop. In the sentences in this slide, the use of object pronouns is unnecessary and wrong, as relative clauses refer to the objects, people, inventor, and pizza delivery boy, respectively. Another thing to consider is the use of comma. In defining object relative clauses, we don't use commas. The information in a defining object relative clause is necessary, so we do not add a comma before this type of clause. Let's see the examples. The precautions that health authorities have taken are quite efficient. In this sentence, the relative clause tells which precautions. The person whom the elderly will apply to is a doctor from the local clinic. This is a definition sentence and the information is essential. Okay. Let's move on to a new rule about defining object relative clauses. Especially in daily use, we can omit or take out the relative pronouns in defining object relative clauses. We tend to keep them in the clause in writing though. Let's go over the sentences in which the relative pronouns are omitted. The precautions health authorities have taken are quite efficient. The person the elderly will apply to is a doctor from the local clinic. As you can see, the rule applies to both human and non-human objects. Okay, just like defining subject relative clauses, defining object relative clauses are used to give essential information that defines the noun they modify. Let's see the example. Stray animals that we see on the streets are generally in bad condition. Here, the relative clause answers the question, which animals? But in object relative clauses, referring to humans, the choice of the relative pronoun may determine the level of formality. Using that implies a less formal situation, while using whom to refer to someone implies a more formal one. Take a look at the examples. Okay guys, let's move on to our next topic, defining versus non-defining relative clauses. So far, we have dealt with defining relative clauses to give essential information. However, there is another type which is used for giving extra information. It is called non-defining relative clause. To form such a clause, we separate the relative clause from the noun with a comma. Some nouns that don't need to be defined are modified with non-defining relative clauses. Examples of such nouns are the names of people and places like Lionel Messi, ODTÜ, or Ankara. Some positions like the mayor, the UN president, or the prime minister. Some obvious names like my mother and my parents. There are some rules that we should follow while using a non-defining relative clause. The most important of them is that the relative pronoun that cannot be used in non-defining subject or object relative clauses. Let's go over the example. Mahatma Gandhi, who was born in Western India, led the successful campaign for India's independence. I didn't read the first one because that is not used in a non-defining relative clause. In this slide, you see that the omit rule does not work in non-defining object relative clauses. Banksy, who everybody knows as a graffiti artist, keeps his identity secret. As you can see, the use of that is not possible in non-defining object relative clauses as well. Another rule is about the use of commas. In non-defining relative clauses, whether they are subject or object relative clauses, we use commas to indicate that we are giving extra information. Let's read the examples. Drones, which have proven very useful for the advertising industry, are used in many film shootings. Avatar, which people remember as an Oscar-winning movie, is in fact the name of a cartoon TV series. Stephen King, whose books are frequently adapted to movies, is a world-famous author. One important aspect of non-defining relative clause is that there is a use where the non-defining relative clause modifies a whole sentence. When there is a comment or additional idea that we want to incorporate into a sentence, we use this clause. We add a comma at the end of the sentence and add the sentence following the relative pronoun which. Let's see how it is done. There is a lot of toilet paper in the supermarket. This is surprising. There is a lot of toilet paper in the supermarket, which is surprising. They provided us with a schedule. This helped us follow the course. They provided us with a schedule, which helped us follow the course. Okay, going on with the topic defining versus non-defining. The use of commas depend on what kind of information we want to give. When we want to give a specific piece of information about a noun, we want to define it. In this case, we use a defining relative clause. Carbon dioxide that is emitted by human activities is responsible for much of greenhouse gases. The information here identifies a particular type of carbon dioxide. However, if you want to give detail about the noun, which is known by everyone, we use a non-defining relative clause. Carbon dioxide, which is a colorless gas with a density about 60% higher than that of dry air, occurs naturally in Earth's atmosphere as a trace gas. Here, the relative clause gives more information about carbon dioxide. In this slide, the noun we have used is different from carbon dioxide. This one is more personal. However, with this type of nouns, the use of commas changes the meaning dramatically. My uncle, who lives in Izmir, is a doctor. Here the relative clause distinguishes this uncle from others, and it also implies that there is more than one uncle. My uncle, who lives in Izmir, is a doctor. The relative clause here gives extra information, not essential, and it also implies that there is only one uncle. The same rule applies for plural nouns. All the students who pass the exam will be given a 5-point performance grade bonus. In this sentence, some students pass the exam, and only those who passed will be given the bonus. All the students who passed the exam will be given a 5-point performance grade bonus. All the students passed the exam in this sentence, and they will all be given the bonus. Okay. Our last teaching point in this video is object relative clauses as objects of prepositions. Sometimes the relative pronouns in object relative clauses can be the object of prepositions. This happens when they are used with the verbs followed by prepositions. Sometimes we bring the preposition in front of the relative clause, and this is a little formal. If we are using this with things, only preposition plus which form is possible. If we are using this with humans, on the other hand, only preposition plus whom is possible. Now, let's see the examples. He was too shy to look at the face of the person he was speaking to. He was too shy to look at the face of the person to whom he was speaking. He continually toyed with the armrest of the chair he was sitting on. He continually toyed with the armrest of the chair on which he was sitting. This use is also possible in non-defining relative clauses. Let's read the examples. The president of the university, who this statement belongs to, has been praised by the students. The president of the university, to whom this statement belongs, has been praised by the students. As you can see, this is the more formal version. The town hall in our county, which many people go to for various reasons, is an old building. The town hall in our county, to which many people go for various reasons, is an old building. Again, this is the more formal version. Okay then, we have now reached the end of the second video on relative clauses. In the next and the final video, we will focus on relative pronouns where, when, and why, and we will also learn the reduction of relative clauses. Take care and stay safe, everyone.